almost 17-year low. The stock market is soaring to record levels. We just hit a new high on Friday, and I think we're hitting another new high today because there's tremendous optimism having to do with business in our country. GDP growth has reached more than 3% last quarter, and other than the hurricanes would have done phenomenally this, and I think we'll still do very well, but something will have to be taken off because of the tremendous problems of the massive hurricanes that we've had to endure. And now I guess you could probably add the wildfires in California. But the economy cannot take off like it really has the potential to do unless we reduce the tax burden on the families, businesses, workers of our country. And we'll be able to do that. I think we're getting tremendous receptivity from the people. I hope we get the same receptivity from Congress. But we are getting tremendous accolades for what we're doing, having to do with both reform and with the massive tax cuts. It'll be the largest tax cuts in the history of our country. We're one of the highest tax nations in the world right now, costing us millions of jobs and trillions of dollars. It's time to restore America's competitive edge and pass historic tax cuts to the American people. 1 point in GDP would be $2.5 trillion. Think of that, revenues. 1 point, we go up from 3 to 4. And when I began, we were in the ones. And now the last quarter, we were at 3.2%. And we're going up higher. But if we went, as an example, from 2 to 3 or from 3 to 4, we're talking about $2.5 trillion. And we're also talking about many millions of jobs. So we want to also reduce excessive government spending, and that's what we're working on at our cabinet meeting today. As we head into next year's budget season, I've asked Director Mulvaney to come up and find various savings in all of the departments that are gathered around the table, which is everybody. I need my cabinet to work with Director Mulvaney to fight these spending cuts, fight for them, and make sure that they happen. And we want to make the departments as lean and efficient as possible. At the same time, we're going to be departments with lots of heart. Lots of heart. One thing we're going to be looking at very strongly is welfare reform. That's becoming a very, very big subject, and people are taking advantage of the system, and then other people aren't receiving what they really need to live, and we think it's very unfair to them. But some people are really taking advantage of our system from that standpoint, and we are going to be looking very, very strongly, therefore, at welfare reform. It's going to be a very big topic under this administration, and it started already, and we have a lot of recommendations that we're going to be making, and you'll be hearing about them very shortly. The other thing we're doing that relates to people's lives is the prescription drug prices are out of control. The drug prices have gone through the roof, and if you look at the same exact drug by the same exact company, made in the same exact box and sold someplace else, sometimes it's a fraction of what we pay in this country. Meaning, as usual, the world is taking advantage of the United States. They're setting prices in other countries, and we're not. The drug companies, frankly, are getting away with murder. And we want to bring our prices down to what other countries are paying, or at least close, and let the other countries pay more, because they're setting such low prices that we're actually subsidizing other countries. And that's just not going to happen anymore. This has been going on for years, where our people are paying so much more for, and I don't mean they're paying 2% more. I mean they're paying double, triple, quadruple. They're paying so much more that it's very unfair to the United States, as usual. Last week, I also sent a letter to Congress outlining my administration's top priorities for immigration reform. This was a bottom-up effort driven by dedicated law enforcement professionals, and they took a big oath to protect our nations. The Justice Department is doing a fantastic job on the border and with regard to immigration, more than anyone's ever seen before from a Justice Department. Thank you very much, Jeff. It's really had an impact, and a very positive impact, and now we're going to take it to 5 steps further. Our proposal closes dangerous loopholes and vulnerabilities that enable illegal immigration, asylum fraud, and visa overstays. The visa overstays are just, you're talking about numbers that nobody even knows what they are. They're so out of control. and we're going to take care of that. When you look at what's going on in Mexico, Mexico is having a tough time right now in terms of crime. More than ever, we need the wall. We have drugs pouring through on the southern border. They're literally pouring through, and we have to have the wall. We're going to have the wall. But if you look at just what's happening on the other side of the border with the tremendous crime and the tremendous problems going on, we have a very good relationship with Mexico, but there are a lot of problems, and we don't want the drugs, and we don't want the crime, and we need the wall. Crucially, we've asked Congress to ensure that any proposed immigration reform ends chain migration. One person comes in and then brings everybody in his family in with him or her. And we have to end chain migration, which is critical for creating a system that puts American workers and the American taxpayer first. Last Thursday, I proudly nominated Kirstjen Nielsen to serve as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I urge the Senate to quickly confirm this really tremendously qualified nominee. And I also asked for my other nominees. We have approximately half the number of nominees confirmed by the Senate because, frankly, the Democrats have terrible policy, terrible, and they're very good at really obstruction. And one thing they do well, their policy's no good, and I'm not even sure they're very good politicians because they don't seem to be doing too well. That could be because of their bad policy. But they're great at obstruction. And we have half the nominees that President Obama had at this time. It's very unfair. They're taking everybody right out to the final moment, in many cases confirming them with tremendous majorities. But they're bringing them out purposely. They're bringing them right down to the final. We have people that are totally qualified. They're going to pass, but they're going to have to wait a long time because it's total obstruction. I can say the same thing with our judicial nominees, our judges. We have some of the most qualified people. The Wall Street Journal wrote a story about it the other day, that this is some of the most qualified people ever, and they're waiting forever online. And it shouldn't happen that way. It's not right and it's not fair. I want to thank Acting Secretary Elaine Duke for her leadership in responding to the catastrophic storms that have struck our nation and our territories. We've also issued a disaster declaration in California in response to the devastating wildfires like we've never seen. And we mourn the terrible loss of life. We have FEMA and first responders there. We have our military helping. It's very sad to watch how fast, how rapidly they move and how people are caught in their houses. I mean, it's an incredible thing, caught in their houses. So we have a lot of people helping government in California, and we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of days. But we're a little subject to winds and what happens with nature. But it's a very, very sad thing to watch. We also continue to pray for the victims of the mass shooting in Las Vegas. We cannot erase the pain of those who lost their loved ones, but we pledge to never leave their side. We're working with them very much so with the FBI and law enforcement, Department of Justice, and I guess a lot of people think they understand what happened, but he was a demented, sick individual. The wires were crossed pretty badly in his brain, extremely badly in his brain, and it's a very sad event. In each of these tragedies, we've witnessed, however, tremendous strength and heroism of our people. Each one of these tragedies that we've had, we have witnessed such strength and such heroism. When Americans are unified, no destructive force on earth can even come close to breaking us apart. We have a lot of work to do on behalf of our magnificent country and our extraordinary citizens. A great trust has been placed upon each member of our cabinet. We have a cabinet that there are those that are saying it's one of the finest group of people ever assembled as a candidate, as a cabinet, and I happen to agree with that. Of course, I should agree with that. But I think we have an extraordinary group of people around this table. This is a tremendous amount of talent. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily looking to be politically correct, although I ended up being politically correct because that was the right thing to do in every sense of the word. However, we have just gotten really, really great people. I'm very proud of them. So we're going to work on all of those things I just outlined and many more. We have the Iran deal that right now is being studied, and I think a lot of people agreed with what I did. I feel strongly about what I did. I'm tired of being taken advantage of as a nation. This nation has been taken advantage of for many, many years, for many decades, frankly, and I'm tired of watching it. But the Iran deal was something that I felt had to be done, and we'll see what phase 2 is. Phase 2 might be positive, and it might be very negative. It might be a total termination. That's a very real possibility. Some would say that's a greater possibility. But it also could turn out to be very positive. We'll see what happens. I thought the tone of the Iranian leaders was very modified, and I was happy to see that, but I don't know if that means anything. They're great negotiators. They negotiated a phenomenal deal for themselves, but a horrible deal for the United States. And we're going to see what happens. The healthcare, as you know, is moving along. Knocked out the CSRs. That was a subsidy to the insurance companies. That was a gift. That was, frankly, what they gave the insurance companies. Just take a look at their stocks. Take a look at where their stock was when Obamacare was originally approved and what it is today. You'll see numbers that anybody, if you invested in those stocks, you'd be extremely happy. And they have given them a total gift. They have given them, you could almost call it a payoff, and it's a disgrace. And that money goes to the insurance companies. We want to take care of poor people. We want to take care of people that need help with health care. And that's what I'm here to do. And I'm never going to get campaign contributions, I guarantee you that, from the insurance companies, but a lot of other people got them. You look at the Democrats, take a look at that. Take a look at how much money has been spent by the Democrats and by the health companies, on politicians generally, but take a look at the coffers of the Democrats. So the CSR payments has actually brought Republicans and Democrats together, because we got calls, emergency calls, from the Democrats, and I think probably the Republicans were also calling them, saying, let's come up with at least a short-term fix of health care in this country. And the gravy train ended the day I knocked out the insurance company's money, which was last week. Hundreds of millions of dollars a month handed to the insurance companies for very little reason, believe me. I want the money to go to the people. I want the money to go to poor people that need it. I want the money to go to people that need proper health care, not to insurance companies, which is where it's going. As of last week, I ended that. So we have a lot of interesting things to do. I'm meeting with Mitch McConnell in a little while for lunch. I think we're going to say a few words on the steps after that. I know you won't have any questions. And pretty much that's it. Enjoy yourselves, folks, and I'll see you out there with Mitch McConnell. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, do you approve of Steve Bannon's war on Mitch McConnell and the Republican establishment?
Well, Steve is very committed. He's a friend of mine, and he's very committed to getting things passed. I mean, look, I have, despite what the press writes, I have great relationships with actually many senators, but in particular with most Republican senators. But we're not getting the job done. And I'm not going to blame myself, I'll be honest. They are not getting the job done. We've had health care approved, and then you had a surprise vote by John McCain. We've had other things happen, and they're not getting the job done. And I can understand where Steve Bannon's coming from, and I can understand, to be honest with you, John, I can understand where a lot of people are coming from, because I'm not happy about it, and a lot of people aren't happy about it. We need tax cuts. We need health care. Now, we're going to get the health care done. In my opinion, what's happening is, as we meet, Republicans are meeting with Democrats because of what I did with the CSRs, because I cut off the gravy train. If I didn't cut the CSRs, they wouldn't be meeting. They'd be having lunch and enjoying themselves, all right? They're right now having emergency meetings to get a short-term fix of health care, where premiums don't have to double and triple every year like they've been doing under Obamacare, because Obamacare is finished. It's dead. It's gone. It's no longer, you shouldn't even mention, it's gone. There is no such thing as Obamacare anymore. It is and I said this years ago, it's a concept that couldn't have worked. In its best days, it couldn't have worked. but we're working on some kind of a short-term fix prior to the Republicans getting together, maybe with some Democrats. Again, it's obstruction, but maybe with some Democrats to fix health care permanently. So I think we'll have a short-term fix with Republicans and Democrats getting together. And after that, we're going to have a successful vote because, as you know, we were one vote short. And I think we have the votes right now, whether it's through block grant or something else. Block granting the money back to the states, which does seem to make sense where the states run it, because it's a smaller form of government. They can be more individually sensitive. So that'll happen fairly shortly. As soon as we have the next reconciliation, I think we'll get the vote for health care. I feel very confident of that. I think we already have the vote for health care. Sadly, the Democrats can't join us on that, which will be the long-term fix. But I do believe we'll have a short-term fix because I think the Democrats will be blamed for the mess. This is an Obamacare mess. When the premiums go up, that has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that we had poor health care, delivered poorly, written poorly, approved by the Democrats. It was called Obamacare. But I think we'll have a short-term fix, and then we'll have a long-term fix, and that will take place probably in March or April. We will have a very solid vote. It'll be probably 100% Republican, no Democrats, but most people know that that's going to be a very good form of health insurance. So that'll be it. Okay? Any other questions? No? Thank you. I'll see you in a little while. I know how he feels. Depends on who you're talking about. There are some Republicans, frankly, that should be ashamed of themselves, but most of them, I tell you what, I know the Republican senators. Most of them are really, really great people that want to work hard and they want to do a great thing for the American public. But you had a few people that really disappointed us. They really, really disappointed us. So I can understand fully how Steve Bannon feels. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you.
There you have President Trump meeting with his full cabinet in the White House. They're taking some questions from reporters after delivering some lengthy remarks on some of his latest priorities, slamming the Democrats as obstructionists, slamming some own members of his Republican Party, and defending his former senior advisor, Steve Bannon, who has since declared a war on the Republican Party. Hey, everyone, I'm Amna Nawaz. Let's walk you through some of what the president said right there, some of the other top headlines we're keeping an eye on right now. Down in Washington, D.C., my colleague Mary Alice Parks joins me live. How you doing today, Mary Alice?
Good, thanks. Hi.
All right, a lot covered there with the president. Let's jump right in. I want to ask you about one of the men who was in the room we didn't see there, made some headlines over the weekend. That is Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State. We know there's been some tension in the past, a lot of reports about that tension growing between Tillerson and President Trump. And over the weekend, he was really pressed about that and where the relationship stands.
Right. And the Republicans have said from the beginning that a lot of this, the rumored friction between Rex Tillerson and the president was just that, just rumors. The UN Secretary Nikki Haley was on ABC's show on Sunday saying that it was just ridiculous. But again, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was pressed over and over by a reporter over the weekend about whether or not he called the president a moron, and he just would not engage in that question, which only fueled more of those rumors about whether these two men are actually getting along. And I think it's important to remember why this matters. It's not just whether or not these two men like each other, but Americans are looking at a really scary world right now. There's a lot of anxiety about what's happening with North Korea, about what's happening with Iran. And so it only fuels anxiety. It makes people more worried about the state of affairs if there's concern that the Secretary of State and the president are not seeing eye to eye.
And it looks like they're sending a message there from the White House. Secretary of State Tillerson receded right to the president's right. Let's move on there. He hinted a little bit about what's to come in a meeting he has later today, a lunch with the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. It doesn't look like it's going to be a very comfortable meeting. The president did not seem happy with the way McConnell is leading his party right now.
No, and he's not been happy for a while. I mean, the president and Mitch McConnell have been going back and forth publicly and sort of behind the scenes for months. I mean, to be a fly on the wall in this meeting, it is going to be sort of a must-do meeting. They have so much they have to get done. These two men have to work together if they're going to get anything across the finish line there on Capitol Hill. Tax reform, the budget, something on healthcare, something on immigration. I mean, the to-do list on Capitol Hill just keeps growing by the day. But it was pretty amazing there, just moments before this lunch, to have the president call Republicans disappointing, to say that some of them should be ashamed of themselves. There was no sort of kind preview to this lunch, so it will be potentially an awkward meeting, but a meeting that is so important if this White House and this Republican Congress want to get anything across the finish line.
Well, Mary Alice, tell me a little bit more about what people are saying there in Washington, because the president there, as you mentioned, did not mince words. He basically said it is their failure. I'm not going to take the blame for this. They are not getting this done. So what are folks saying about that down in Washington?
Right. Wasn't that so interesting? I'm not going to take the blame for this. I mean, he sat there with his arms crossed and said that it is the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue that is the reason nothing has happened. You know, people here in Washington know that that's just not how government works. Not only like literally that's not how government works. I mean, the White House has to sign, the president has to sign any bill that Congress passed. But also that's just not really practically how bills get done. It generally just takes a full court press to tackle big topics. It takes the president talking up the positives of any new legislation around the country, talking to his supporters about why a new bill might be a good idea, working with lawmakers to cut some deals or help them understand what he wants and what he's willing to sign. And so without that kind of synergy between the White House and Congress, it can just be nearly impossible to pass big pieces of legislation. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. We're not talking about small items on this to-do list. We're talking about mega pieces of legislation. Tax reform, healthcare, immigration, some of the toughest topics that Washington ever tackles.
Mega pieces of legislation and of the economy, and a lot hanging in the balance there. I want to ask you about another person he mentioned there by name. He was asked about him by our colleague John Carl, who was there in the room. Steve Bannon, the former senior advisor who has since departed the White House. He gave a pretty fiery speech this weekend. It was at this Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. He basically declared war on the party of the president, the president he worked for. I want to play a little bit of sound for you, and we'll talk about it on the back end. Here's Steve Bannon from this weekend.
This is not my war. This is our war. But there's a time and season for everything. And right now, it's a season of war against a GOP establishment.
Mary Alice, we know this is an unconventional president. His supporters are always saying that he does things in an unconventional way, has unconventional ways of motivating people. What is going on with this, with Steve Bannon openly declaring war on the party of the president?
Now, obviously, Steve Bannon does not work in the White House anymore. He's a private citizen. But there are big questions in Washington this morning about whether or not Steve Bannon was speaking still on behalf of the president in some way, because the two men are close. They say they still talk. So was he representing what the president was after? And that was sort of the big question this morning, one of the big questions I had. And I was struck from the president's remarks there with his cabinet. The president seemed to say yes, that he agreed with what Steve Bannon was doing. He called him a friend. He said that he understands where Steve Bannon is coming from and that he's been really disappointed in many Republican leaders on Capitol Hill. You know, I think that we have to weigh whether or not, or the president and Steve Bannon, they're going to have to weigh whether this is sort of a short-term strategy, but perhaps with really risky long-term implications. If you say that it's everyone else's fault that nothing's getting done, you sort of protect yourself, right? Protect the president, the White House from any political blame. But down the road, in next year for the midterms or a few years after that, it could potentially be hard for this White House to say that voters should back Republican candidates if the White House has been saying that it's their fault that nothing's been getting done. So it is a risky move. It is obviously not going over well with plenty of Republicans here in Washington who would just like to see the president have their back.
And it's worth pointing out, too, the Republicans are not the only party here with any kind of infighting going on. We've been noticing some of these fractures within the Democratic Party for a while, building, of course, since the last election. But we're seeing the first real sign of it in California now, right? Senator Dianne Feinstein now will have a challenger, and that's a pretty big deal.
Oh, it's a huge deal. It's sort of really begun now in earnest on the Democratic side. We have a really serious candidate, the president of the California State Senate, taking on a very high-profile senator, Dianne Feinstein, a sort of ranking member there in the Senate. She is a real institution back in her home state. But the challenger now, the primary challenger coming from the left, a much younger guy, coming in instantly with quite a lot of backing from some very leading progressive grassroots organizations. So this looks like it has the potential to be a really unpredictable race, a really serious race. And remember, California has that really interesting jungle primary where the top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, advance to the general election. So it very well likely could be 2 Democrats competing up until the very end. So you're exactly right. It's not as if Democrats in any way are immune to infighting and fracturing. And we expect Democrats to have to sort of come to terms in a really real way. The party here in Washington is just going to have to figure out how it navigates a lot of that infighting in its party as well.
Some tough fights ahead. We'll be following them all right here. Mary Alice Parks, down in Washington, D.C. Good to talk to you.
You too, Amna.
And thanks to all of you for watching as well. Head over to abcnews.com, get all the latest headlines, or download the ABC News app and get those headlines right to your phone. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.